Take a look at this plate, everyone. My wife has managed to turn a premium prime rib into a dry, gray strip of leather, proving once again that she is an incompetent cook who lacks the basic intelligence to follow a simple culinary instruction. Those were the exact words my husband, Julian, projected into the microphone at the annual culinary fundraising gala inside the grand mezzanine of the Silver Oak Country Club. There were 80 dinner guests in attendance, including the city's top restaurateurs, Julian's culinary line staff, and our entire social circle. My name is Alina Vance. I am 33 years old, and this is the story of how a man spent 7 years using daily criticism to slowly erode my confidence, only to discover that the quiet woman cleaning his kitchen was methodically documenting his professional ruin. Today, Julian no longer holds the title of executive chef at the city's most prestigious restaurant group, and the $450,000 culinary studio he tried to exclude me from belongs entirely to me. Delivered by a master chef who knows exactly how to identify a fraudulent talent. To understand how I found myself standing beneath the harsh halogen lights of a commercial display kitchen while my husband dismantled my worth, you must examine the architecture of our life in Stonehaven. We lived in a 4-bedroom minimalist modern house on Crestview Drive. The home was an exercise in sterile perfection. The floors were polished white concrete, always cold to the touch. The air smelled permanently of bleached linen and citrus degreaser, a sharp, chemical fragrance that I was expected to maintain every single day. Julian was the celebrated executive chef at Bistro Lumière, a high-end French establishment in the culinary district. He was a man who lived by precise margins, demanding that everything in his domestic life match the rigorous plating standards of his commercial kitchen. In our home, there was a strict, unyielding hierarchy. Julian was at the absolute peak. His word was law. Below him was his younger brother, Marcus, who lived in our detached guest house and worked as Julian's sous chef. Marcus was a loud, heavy-set man who smelled of truffle oil and stale cigarettes, possessing a habit of leaving muddy boot prints on my freshly scrubbed concrete floors. At the absolute bottom of this social ladder was me. Before I married Julian, I worked as a senior quality assurance auditor for a regional agricultural supply firm. I specialized in supply chain verification, food safety documentation, and operational compliance. I was paid $92,000 a year, and I understood how to track systemic errors through thousands of pages of shipping manifests. When Julian and I married 7 years ago, he insisted that my job was a distraction. He told me that an executive chef needed a spouse who could dedicate herself fully to managing his private culinary schedule, hosting exclusive tasting previews, and keeping his home in pristine condition. I agreed, believing his promise that our finances and achievements would be fully shared. That was my fundamental mistake. The moment my independent salary stopped, my position in his life shifted from a life partner to an unpaid domestic assistant. Julian provided me with a strict budget of $250 a week for groceries and household maintenance. Every Saturday morning at precisely 9:00 a.m., he would sit at the stainless steel kitchen island, open his leather-bound ledger, and review my physical receipts. If a pound of unsalted organic butter cost 50 cents more at the local creamery than at the commercial restaurant depot, he would tap his silver oyster knife against the counter and demand an explanation for my inefficiency. Marcus would often stand by the refrigerator, drinking orange juice straight from the carton, and laugh softly. He would say, "Chef operates on prime costs, Alina. If you can't manage the food cost at home, you're just dead weight on the line." This was the background noise of my life for 7 long years. It was a calculated, daily dripping of small criticisms designed to ensure I felt entirely dependent on his intelligence, his career, and his financial permission. The slights accumulated with escalating severity, moving from private remarks to public declarations. The first major escalation occurred 4 years ago during a private New Year's Eve dinner party we hosted for 8 people, including the principal owner of the Bistro Lumiere restaurant group, a wealthy real estate developer named Charles Montgomery. I had spent 14 hours preparing a traditional French bouillabaisse, sourcing fresh red snapper, clams, and saffron at 3 different markets. As Julian served the soup to his boss, he took a small spoonful from the pot, tasted it, and immediately dropped the spoon back into the broth with a loud metallic clank. He looked across the table at Charles and shook his head. "I apologize for the lack of depth in the broth, Charles. Elena simply cannot grasp the concept of building a proper flavor profile. She treats cooking like a basic chore instead of an art form, which I suppose is what happens when you spend your life looking at warehouse spreadsheets." The guests looked down at their plates, shifting uncomfortably in their leather chairs. I stood there, holding a basket of warm, crusty sourdough bread, my fingers pressing into the rough linen napkin until my nails left deep marks. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my work. I set the bread basket down gently in the center of the table, smiled at Charles Montgomery, and said, "Please, enjoy the evening." I sat in my chair at the end of the table and ate my soup in silence. It was perfectly balanced, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. The second incident happened 2 years later, in the spring of 2024. My father passed away in Indiana, leaving me a personal inheritance of $85,000 from his life insurance policy. The money was deposited into a personal account that I had kept from my working days. 2 weeks after the funeral, Julian discovered the statement on our home office desk. He came into the living room, holding the paper between his index finger and thumb as if it were contaminated. He threw it onto the coffee table in front of me. "Your father's small estate is an operational liability if left sitting in a low-yield savings account, Elena. I am expanding the culinary studio next month, and I require exactly $85,000 to finalize the purchase of the commercial line equipment. I've already drafted the transfer authorization for your signature." I looked up at him, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The room smelled of the lavender floor wax I had applied that morning. "That money was my father's final gift to me, Julian. I intended to keep it safe for my future." Julian leaned down, his face inches from mine, his eyes narrowing into cold, hard slits. "Your future is entirely tied to my success. Without my career, you have no standing in this town. If you refuse to invest in this family's business, you are proving that you are a selfish dependent who expects a free ride. Sign the paper, or you can start paying me market rent for your room in this house." I felt a cold numbness spread from my chest down to my fingertips. I looked at the polished concrete floor, then back at his face. My voice remained completely calm, low, and even. "I will transfer the funds to the business account tomorrow morning, Julian." He didn't thank me. He turned around, walked into his study, and closed the door. I sat in the quiet room for 3 hours, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, making a silent vow that every dollar he took from me would eventually be returned with interest. The third public escalation occurred during a summer block party in July of 2025. We were standing on the manicured lawn of our neighbors, the White Picket estate belonging to the local district attorney. There were 40 guests scattered around the outdoor patio, holding small porcelain plates of grilled food and cups of white wine. A prominent food columnist for the local newspaper turned to Julian and asked if he ever let his wife cook at home. Julian laughed loudly, a sharp, mocking sound that instantly drew the attention of the surrounding circle. He patted my shoulder, his fingers digging into my collarbone with enough force to leave a dull ache. "Let Elena cook, only if I want my kitchen destroyed and my palate insulted." Last week, she managed to curdle a basic hollandaise sauce twice in one morning. I've had to take over the home kitchen entirely just to protect my sanity. She's completely useless when it comes to technical execution. Several of his line cooks who were attending the party laughed obediently. I looked directly into Julian's eyes, my face completely expressionless. I did not pull away from his grip. I lifted my wine glass, took a small sip of room temperature water, and said, "Technical execution is easy to judge when you aren't the one cleaning the workspace afterward." Julian, he brushed my comment off as a defense mechanism, calling me overly sensitive. But his fingers tightened on my shoulder for another second before he walked away to speak with the food columnist. The definitive act that crossed the line happened 6 months before the annual culinary gala. I was organizing Julian's home office on a Thursday afternoon, wiping down the teak shelving units. As I shifted a heavy leather folder containing his private corporate filings for Bistro Lumiere, a document fell out from a hidden sleeve in the back. It was a newly drafted operating agreement for the Stonehaven Culinary Studio. The $450,000 commercial teaching kitchen and tasting room that had been purchased using my father's $85,000 inheritance as the primary down payment. The document had been drawn up by Julian's private corporate attorney. It explicitly listed Julian Vance and his brother, Marcus Vance, as the sole 50-50 managing members of the LLC. My name was completely absent from the registration. More critically, there was an attached addendum that detailed a structured asset protection plan. In the event of a marital dissolution, the document stated that the culinary studio was a corporate asset entirely separate from the marital estate, and that I had waived all future equitable distribution claims to the property in exchange for a single, non-adjustable payout of $10,000. Julian had already signed the page. In the margin, his attorney had written a neat note: "Ensure she does not sign any corporate correspondence or participate in the studio's opening events. Her status must remain legally defined as a non-contributing spouse to preserve this shield." I stood in the sunlit office, holding the crisp white paper. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with a slow, heavy rhythm. My hands remained perfectly steady. My heart did not race. Julian wasn't just criticizing my cooking. He was systematically executing a long-term plan to strip me of my inheritance, exploit my unpaid labor, and cast me aside with a fraction of what he had stolen from my father's legacy. He believed I was stupid because I chose not to argue with him. He thought my silence was compliance, but it was actually observation. I took my phone out of my pocket, photographed every single page of the operating agreement, placed the original document back into the hidden sleeve of the leather folder exactly as I had found it, and walked down the stairs. I went to the kitchen, filled a glass with cold tap water, and sat at the island. I did not shed a single tear. The residual affection I had carried for him for 7 years died instantly in that quiet room. It was replaced by a cold, operational focus. I was a quality assurance auditor. Julian had forgotten that my entire career had been built on finding the structural fraud that hidden professionals left behind. The following morning, I made a single phone call from my car, parked 3 blocks away from our house. I did not call a local divorce lawyer. I called Master Chef Jean-Luc Laurent. Jean-Luc was a 70-year-old culinary legend, a multi-starred icon who owned the elite international restaurant group that held the ultimate master lease for Bistro Lumiere. He was the man who had originally approved Julian's appointment as executive chef, but he lived in New York and rarely visited our regional market. More importantly, Jean-Luc had been a close personal friend of my late father, who had secured premium, organic heirloom produce lines for Jean-Luc's East Coast restaurants for over 2 decades. I had met Jean-Luc when I was a teenager, and he had always remembered my father's unyielding integrity. "Elena, my dear child," Jean-Luc's deep, resonant French accent came through the speaker. "It has been far too long since we spoke. I was deeply saddened to hear about your father's passing." "Thank you, Jean-Luc," I said, my voice completely steady and calm. "He respected you immensely. I am calling you today because I have returned to my professional roots as an auditor, and I have uncovered a major operational and financial compliance vulnerability within your regional property, Bistro Lumiere. Specifically, within the procurement and quality assurance accounts managed by Julian Vance. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could hear the faint clinking of copper pans in the background of his New York kitchen. A compliance vulnerability with Chef Julian. What nature of vulnerability, Alina? Systemic procurement fraud, supplier kickbacks, and falsification of organic certification logs, I replied. He is compromising the integrity of your brand to fund his private real estate holdings. Jean-Luc's voice lost all of its warmth, shifting into the sharp, commanding tone of a man who managed a global culinary empire. I am flying into your city on December 5th for the annual Silver Oak Culinary Gala. I want to see the documentation before I attend that dinner. Can you deliver it to my hotel suite? The files will be complete, verified, and completely cross-referenced, Jean-Luc, I said. Then do what your father would do, Alina. Find the truth, he said, and hung up. Over the next 5 months, I turned our home into a silent forensic laboratory. Every night, after Julian fell into a deep sleep brought on by wine and the exhaustion of the kitchen line, I would slip down to the basement sewing room. Inside an old oak wardrobe, hidden behind stacks of winter blankets, I kept a high-definition portable document scanner. Julian was profoundly arrogant. Because he viewed me as a simple housewife who was incapable of understanding complex business operations, he routinely brought his commercial vendor invoices, private restaurant ledgers, and cash expense logs home. He left his corporate laptop unlocked on his study desk, and he frequently had me print out his monthly food cost summaries because he claimed he hated dealing with digital files. He thought I was just organizing his paper. He had no idea I was auditing his life. What I uncovered through my nightly analysis was a massive, systemic criminal enterprise. Julian and his brother, Marcus, had been running a highly organized kickback scheme through Bistro Lumiere's primary ingredient supply chain. Julian had established a shell distribution company registered under the name Stonehaven Agricultural Partners, an entity that existed only as a post office box in Delaware. He was forcing Bistro Lumiere's local suppliers to route their high-end meats, cheeses, and organic produce through this shell company at a massive, artificial price markup of 34%. The suppliers complied because Julian threatened to terminate their restaurant contracts if they refused. The shell company would then bill Bistro Lumiere for the inflated amounts, and Julian would approve the payments from the corporate account. The excess profit, totaling exactly $287,000 over a 40-month period, was systematically withdrawn in cash and routed directly into the purchase and construction of his private Stonehaven culinary studio. Furthermore, he had been falsifying the mandatory safety and organic certification logs, substituting lower-grade commercial factory meats for the premium, pasture-raised products that Jean-Luc's brand guaranteed on the menu. Every single fraudulent invoice, every fake delivery receipt, and every hidden cash ledger was systematically scanned, indexed, and uploaded to a secure, triple-encrypted cloud drive. I cross-referenced every suspicious transaction with the exact dates of Julian's personal bank deposits and the construction invoices for the culinary studio. I compiled a comprehensive, 184-page forensic audit report that was so precise, clean, and legally airtight that no corporate defense attorney could find a single flaw in the chain of custody. On the afternoon of December 5th, I walked into the penthouse suite of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. Jean-Luc Laurent sat by the window, a cup of black espresso on the table beside him. He did not speak as I handed him the thick leather binder containing the physical copy of the report, along with the digital drive. He put on his reading glasses and began to turn the pages. The only sound in the room for 1 hour was the crisp rustling of heavy paper and the distant hum of city traffic 60 floors below. As he reached the final section, the cross-referenced bank records showing the $287,000 diversion into the private culinary studio, Jean-Luc closed the binder with a sharp, echoing thud. His face was pale with a quiet, lethal rage. "He has dragged my name through the mud," Jean-Luc said, his voice dangerously low. He has fed my guests commercial waste while charging them for luxury, and he has stolen from the company that gave him his entire life. Yes, I said, looking him directly in the eye. He has done all of that while telling the world that I was the liability in his household. Jean-Luc looked at me, his eyes softening with deep respect. Your father would be immensely proud of this work, Elena. It is a masterpiece of forensic auditing. What is your requirement? I can have the corporate lawyers file an injunction immediately and terminate him quietly before sunset. No, Jean-Luc, I said, my voice completely level and calm. Julian has spent 7 years using public spaces to dismantle my dignity. He has organized a live cooking demonstration for 80 guests at the Silver Oak Country Club gala tonight. He intends to use that stage to showcase his brilliance before your regional contract is renewed. I want the truth to be delivered in the exact arena where he constructed his lie. Jean-Luc smiled, a slow, grim expression that revealed the iron will of a man who had survived 50 years at the top of a brutal industry. The Silver Oak Gala is an official corporate event for my restaurant group. I am the chairman of that dinner. If you wish to serve him his final meal tonight, Elena, I will gladly provide the kitchen. Thank you, Jean-Luc, I said. I stood up, buttoned my wool coat, and left the hotel suite. The hours leading up to the gala were a masterclass in psychological composure. Julian was in an exceptionally foul mood, screaming at his line cooks over the phone as he sat in our kitchen dressing in his pressed white chef's whites. He had forgotten his silver cuff links on his dresser, and when I brought them to him, he snatched them from my hand, brushing his knuckles against my palm. Make sure you don't embarrass me tonight, Elena. The Montgomerys and Jean-Luc Laurent will be sitting at the head table. Try to look like you belong in a room with people of substance, and keep your mouth shut if anyone asks you about the restaurant's operations. You don't have the vocabulary for it. I will ensure my remarks are exactly suited to the occasion, Julian, I said softly. The grand mezzanine of the Silver Oak Country Club was a visual display of culinary wealth. The room was illuminated by soft amber lighting, and the 80 guests were dressed in black tuxedos and designer silk gowns. The air smelled of roasted garlic, aged oak wine barrels, and expensive perfumes. Julian was commanding the room, moving from table to table before his live demonstration, shaking hands with the city's elite, accepting compliments on Bistro Lumiere's recent reviews. He looked the part of a successful culinary master, confident, sharp, and utterly untouchable. I sat at table 1, dressed in a simple, tailored black crepe dress, my grandmother's small pearl earrings my only adornment. I held a glass of sparkling water, my eyes tracking his movements with absolute clarity. Marcus sat next to me, already deep into his 3rd glass of bourbon, boasting to a real estate investor about the custom Italian marble counters they had just installed at the private culinary studio. At 9:00 p.m., the lights in the ballroom dimmed, and the bright halogen spotlights over the stage kitchen clicked on with a loud hiss. The president of the Regional Restaurant Association took the microphone and introduced Julian Vance for his live masterclass presentation of a premium dry-aged prime rib roast. The crowd applauded enthusiastically as Julian stepped onto the stage, adjusting his white apron, smiling confidently beneath the lights. He began his demonstration, moving with practiced ease, explaining the scientific process of protein denaturing and flavor locking. As he finished carving the demonstration portion, he looked down at table 1, his eyes finding me. He raised the microphone, his voice carrying an arrogant, mocking edge that was entirely familiar to everyone in our house. To demonstrate the absolute importance of precision in temperature control, Julian said into the microphone, his voice echoing clearly through the ballroom speakers, I want to invite my wife, Elena, to step up to the line. Elena has spent 7 years under my roof, and despite my best efforts to educate her, she still struggles with basic culinary execution. Take a look at this plate, everyone. My wife has managed to turn a premium prime rib into a dry, gray strip of leather. proving once again that she is an incompetent cook who lacks the basic intelligence to follow a simple culinary instruction. Let this be a lesson. When you don't understand the quality of the raw material, you ruin the entire output. A few polite chuckles rippled through the back of the room. But the majority of the guests went completely silent, shifting uncomfortably under the raw cruelty of the remark. Marcus laughed loudly, raising his bourbon glass toward the stage. Julian stood behind the stainless steel counter, a smirk of absolute satisfaction on his face. He believed he had successfully used me as a public prop to highlight his own superior standards in front of Charles Montgomery and his peers. I did not lower my eyes. I did not blush. I stood up from table one slowly, smoothed my black dress, and walked down the center aisle toward the stage kitchen. I climbed the wooden steps, stepped behind the counter, and stood directly next to my husband beneath the bright halogen lights. I did not look like a humiliated dependent. I stood with the absolute posture of a senior auditor entering a failed facility. From the front row, Jean-Luc Laurent stood up from his seat. He did not applaud. He walked up the steps of the stage, took the spare microphone from the media podium, and stepped into the center of the kitchen display. He didn't look at the plate of beef. His eyes were fixed entirely on Julian. "Chef Julian," Jean-Luc's voice boomed through the grand mezzanine, heavy with an ancient, unyielding authority that instantly froze the room into total immobility. "You speak very loudly about the quality of the raw material, but you are remarkably silent about the quality of your own ledger." Julian's smirk vanished instantly. His face went rigid, a slight twitch developing beneath his left eye. "Master Chef Laurent, it was simply a playful demonstration for the guests, a small joke about domestic cooking." "The only joke in this kitchen is your title, Julian," Jean-Luc interrupted, his voice dropping into a lethal, quiet register that cut through the room like a filleting knife. "This afternoon, the executive board of my international restaurant group completed a full review of a comprehensive forensic compliance report. We have verified that for over 3 years, you and your brother, Marcus, have been running a systematic procurement fraud scheme through a phantom shell corporation, overcharging my properties by exactly $287,000 to fund your private real estate projects. Furthermore, you have compromised the health of my brand by substituting substandard commercial factory meat for our certified organic product lines." A massive gasp erupted from the 80 guests. Charles Montgomery stood up from his table, his face dark with fury. Marcus Vance attempted to slide out of his chair toward the exit doors, but 2 uniformed security guards stepped into the doorway, blocking his path. Julian gripped the edge of the stainless steel counter, so tightly his fingernails turned white. A heavy bead of sweat breaking across his forehead and dripping down his cheek into his embroidered collar. Jean-Luc turned back to the microphone, his hand gesturing toward me. "This forensic audit was initiated, compiled, and finalized by a professional whose intelligence you have spent 7 years insulting. Director Elena Vance is the newly appointed Chief Auditor of Global Procurement for Laurent International Group. Her report has already been delivered to the State District Attorney's Office and the Compliance Division of the State Revenue Service." Julian looked at me, his mouth opening and closing without producing a sound, his eyes wide with a frantic, unraveled terror. The entire structure of his corporate arrogance had been completely dismantled in less than 2 minutes. In front of every restaurateur, client, and peer he had ever sought to dominate. I stepped up to the podium, pulled the main microphone toward me, and looked directly into my husband's pale, sweating face. My voice was calm, composed, and entirely level. "The quality of the material is perfectly sound, Julian," I said, my voice carrying into every corner of the silent ballroom. "It was the chef who failed the inspection. You are relieved of your duties." "Get off my line." 2 plainclothes detectives from the local precinct stepped up onto the stage, took Julian by his arms, and led him down the steps and out through the service doors in absolute silence. He did not look back. He could not look back. The aftermath was an exercise in absolute institutional execution. Julian and Marcus were formally indicted on multiple counts of grand larceny, commercial bribery, and corporate fraud. The evidence I gathered was so mathematically airtight, so thoroughly documented through their own signed vouchers, that their defense team surrendered within 3 weeks. Julian pleaded guilty to reduced charges of grand theft and corporate fraud. He was sentenced to 5 years in a state correctional institution and ordered to pay full financial restitution of the $287,000 to Laurent International Group, along with a $50,000 civil penalty to the State Tax Compliance Authority. To satisfy the massive restitution judgment, Julian's personal assets were entirely liquidated by the court. The minimalist modern house on Crestview Drive was sold at public auction. Because the court verified that my father's $85,000 inheritance had been fraudulently obtained and used as the direct down payment for the Stonehaven Culinary Studio, my attorney successfully filed a priority equitable title petition. The court dissolved the fraudulent operating agreement completely and awarded the sole, unencumbered ownership of the $450,000 culinary studio entirely to me. Marcus Vance was sentenced to 2 years of probation and lost his culinary license permanently. He called me from a payphone outside a regional employment center 3 months after the trial. His voice was thin, raspy, and entirely drained of its former volume. He spent 15 minutes weeping, apologizing for his behavior in our kitchen, and asking if I would hire him as a basic dishwasher at my new culinary studio, because no restaurant in the state would let him enter their kitchen line. I sat at the polished maple desk inside my beautiful, light-filled studio office, listening to the rain tap against the glass window. The room smelled of fresh rosemary, clean wood, and citrus oil. "I receive your apology, Marcus," I said, my voice completely cool and even. "But my operational staff is selected based on absolute compliance and professional integrity. Your presence on my line would be an unacceptable structural liability. I suggest you look for employment in a field that doesn't require a trusted inventory." I hung up the phone and placed it face down on the desk. His situation didn't move me. He was simply a line item that had been permanently deleted from the balance sheet. I still live in Stonehaven, but I have moved into a beautiful, historic brick townhouse near the waterfront. The white concrete floors of my past are gone, replaced by warm, dark oak floorboards that creak pleasantly when I walk. The sterile chemical smells have been replaced by the rich, real fragrances of a true kitchen: roasted coffee beans, fresh-baked bread, and garlic simmering in pure olive oil. I wake up every morning at 6:00 a.m., make myself a small plate of poached eggs, and look out at the harbor. I no longer have to justify the cost of organic butter to a man with a gold signet ring. I lost 7 years to a husband who sought to minimize my existence to protect his own systemic fraud. I lost the naive belief that staying quiet in the face of cruelty was a form of marital duty, and I lost the time I could have spent building my own name. But what I gained was the absolute realization of my own formidable power. I gained an executive career with an international corporate family that respects my mind, and I gained an independent business that stands as a living monument to my father's integrity. I now understand that a person's true value cannot be measured by the title on their chef's coat or the volume of their criticism at a dinner table. It is built in the quiet precision of the truth, in the documentation, and in the unyielding patience of the person who knows how to wait for the ledger to balance. Julian thought I was an incompetent cook because I didn't raise my voice when he insulted the meat. He forgot that the woman who cleans the kitchen is always the one who controls the inventory. My name is Alina Vance. I am a master auditor, and this kitchen belongs entirely to me.